Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the political challenges that face the government, the economic challenges that face the government at this time. After the change in government, we've also seen the ruling party, as far as the PMLN is concerned, say that there are going to be major decisions being made in the next coming days. Taking people and the allies into confidence seems to be on the top of the agenda. Also, as far as the last government was concerned, we've seen in terms of the dollar come from 105 when the last time that the PMLN government left, it seemed to be at 118. And now, according to the government, when they took over, it was at 189. We've also seen the foreign exchange reserves, whereas there has been no major change there. There's also been the current account deficit has increased by more than about $1 billion. There's also trade deficit as far as from 2018 to 2022, from 30.9 billion come up to 43 billion, and which is expected. The tax to GDP ratio come down from 11.1 to 9.1. In these kind of statistics, we've now seen the PMLN talk about taking, like I said, the people and its allies into confidence, which seems to be the paramount consideration of the government at this time to control the economic situation in the coming days. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about the political situation with all political parties continuing their rallies, continuing their jalsas, continuing with the temperature continuing to rise between the political parties. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Dr. Ali Salman, who is an economist. Thank you for joining us. We also have with us Dr. Salman Shah, who is with the PTI. He's also an economist. Thank you for being with us. Ali Salman Saab, let me start off with you. As far as the overall situation is concerned, like I said, in terms of statistics, if we break it down and we talk about what the situation was in 2018 to what it is now, there's nobody who's going to dispute the fact that things have consistently gone worse. How would you look at the situation in the coming weeks, particularly considering where we are at this point, where the dollar is at this point?
Well, Mahrukh, first let me make an initial statement. I think it will be sort of unfair to say that all things have gone on a sort of worst trajectory in last 3 years. Yes, you're right that when you look at just one number, let's say the balance of payment deficit, we were facing a similar issue back in 2018 as we are. And we were entering into an IMF program even at that time, which was significantly delayed, and then we entered into the BOP program management. But I think in last 3 years, there were some reforms taken in terms of the exchange rate regime, in terms of certain degree of tax reforms.
But in terms of this, like I said, in terms of the statistics that we have at this time, the overall economic situation of the country, nobody can deny, has gotten worse. Would you agree with that?
I would see it as a mixed scenario. Okay. For instance, if you look at the growth rate of the country after the initial declining and a negative growth rate which country experienced in 2019, we actually registered a reasonable growth rate of about 4.5 to 5%. And our industrial manufacturing growth rate has also remained quite on a high rate.
As far as inflation is concerned,
yes. I think we have to be specific about, say, if you talk about inflation, there is no one can deny that it is going upward, right? And especially the food commodities and also the fuel prices. Although there was they introduced a ban on the freeze on the fuel prices, the previous government, I think, which was a very irresponsible decision. So that is actually a major concern. If you look at the sugar price, if you look at the flour market. But this is also happening in conjunction with the global trends. Okay. And in a post-COVID world, I think, especially the situation in the region, the war in Ukraine, this is understandable. But what is perhaps worrisome is a lack of clarity, also in terms of the economic policy. Okay. And that is what we expect the present government to immediately announce its priorities.
Let me come back to you. I'll go to Dr. Salman Shah. Dr. Sab, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Dr. Would you agree that overall, as far as the inflation situation is concerned, as far as inflation is concerned, we've seen things get consistently worse, and whether we talk about the global trends or not, as far as Pakistan is concerned, we are facing one of the worst economic crises at this time that the government says it was handed over.
Well, I think the government about 6 weeks ago was in opposition, and at that time they were saying that why are we pursuing this IMF program and why are we following the IMF dictates? And Miftah Ismail was saying 135 rupees to a litre is unimaginable price, and is the government crazy? And today the roles have been reversed. Now the government the opposition is now in the government and the government is in the opposition. And of course, politics dictates that the government will have to take...
Dr. We can't hear you. There's a problem with your audio. We'll try to connect again. Salman Sahab, as far as as far as dollar is concerned, there's also a lot of concern there.
Certainly.
And we saw the fact that when the PMLN government left, I think as far as the statistics go, it was at 120, if I'm not wrong, 118, sorry. And this time it seems to be at, when the PTI government left, it was at 189. Now again, we've seen an increase there also. Do you think that, what are the factors in your opinion which are continuing, responsible for continuing this uprise as far as the dollar is concerned?
Sure. In 2017, the dollar was about 104 rupees. And this is now 192 rupees. This is almost, the dollar has appreciated almost by double.
Right.
And that's a significant devaluation of Pakistani rupee. So there are a number of factors which we can explain. First of all, our balance of payment and the current account situation has not improved. It improved in the interim period, but because the underlying economic structure is not so strong, and we had not made investments in the productive capacity of our economy, what happens is whenever our economy is growing beyond, let's say, 5%, our imports picked up and sort of a demand for dollars increase. And that is something our exports, and by the same token, our exports have not picked up. I mean, there has been some degree of growth in the exports in last year, I would say, which was reasonable. But this was on the back of a significant devaluation. The growth in the exports, which occurred in last 3 years, was mostly in the terms of the prices and not in terms of the value or the production. And so when you have an economy which is not earning enough, or which is not getting earned dollars through exports or through investments, then definitely there is a pressure on the dollar.
Would you say that it's also, I mean, when you talked about confusion earlier on as far as economic policies are concerned, would you say that the last government, in the last government, as far as the last 3 years are concerned, we saw a lot of change as far as ministers were concerned, a lot of portfolios were switched. Do you think overall the confusion stemmed from there, because we haven't seen the kind of changes we saw as far as advisors are concerned, as far as like I said, switching of portfolios, there was no consistency. One has to
I totally agree with you. And we had a number of finance ministers. We had, I think, 5 or 6 chairmen of FBR in last 3 or 4 years. We had a number of finance secretaries changed. And so that is actually, again, there was some, I would say, some degree of clarity in the middle of this previous regime. And I hope that when Pakistan committed to IMF program, although we are normally very critical of the IMF program, but in my opinion, IMF program in the current situation provides a useful disciplinary framework for Pakistani economic planners.
So when we talk about the IMF program, are we talking, I mean, I imagine we're talking about further increases also as far as prices are concerned, right?
Yes, I mean, unfortunately that is true. The immediate demand of IMF is right now to withdraw the subsidy and the price freeze which was introduced in February.
Which again,
this year.
you know, seems to be, let me go to Salman Shah Sahab. I think that his audio is okay. Ji, Salman Sahab, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Ji, we're talking about the subsidy, you know, given by the PTI government, which seems to have been, you know, taken, doesn't seem to be a very rational decision at this time. A lot of people are saying that. How would you answer that? I mean, considering the fact that as far as the IMF program is concerned, and I think we've spoken about this before also, there are going to be tough decisions that have to be made now for this government.
Well, I think Shaukat Tareen Saab has been consistently saying that he had totally funded the subsidy, and he has also explained how he funded it. So I think it was a limited time period subsidy, and given that we are in the middle of the Ukrainian war and this external shock is primarily due to that war, and hopefully that war will come to a close in another couple of weeks. And the stress which we see in the international energy markets and the international food markets may start to subside. So I think that it depends on what your priorities are. Now the current government has no plan, and that is what is very problematic, because if they had a plan and they were saying that the previous government is very incompetent, and once we come in, we'll be very competent and we'll do all the needed things. So none has been done so far. So I think we have wasted a lot of time.
But Salman Sahab, don't you think it's a little too early to expect the government to take those major decisions right when they stepped into, you know, into government?
If they were not prepared to take those decisions, then what was the urgency in dislodging a well-functioning government in the first place?
But
so
the fact
if
is,
they were in such a hurry, then they must have had a plan.
The factors that you're talking about, the factors, you know, the global factors that you're talking about were just as relevant when the last government was there. You know, the price hike was relevant when the last government was there. The inflation was relevant when the last government was there. And I think we were speaking about the same factors a couple of months ago when, you know, the government hadn't changed. So the trend of increase was very much there. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, but what was happening was that the PMLN at that time and the PDM, I would say, was saying that all this inflation is due to the incompetence of the government, and therefore they have to be removed to save the people from a catastrophe. Now, where is that catastrophe? So what I'm saying is that it was based on a false narrative, and now when they are in, they don't seem to have any plan. And so they are a bit floundering. They have had a session with the IMF, and it has been not conclusive. So I think that basically whatever they have to do it quick, because this is the point in which the markets have been spooked. And you need to calm down the markets. Now the finance minister, if he is also proclaiming at the same time that there is a very big crisis and things will get very bad, that further spooks the market. So I think that the timing of the changeover and now the ill-preparedness of the government and not being able to take the decisions, it is taking its toll.
Let me come back to you. Ali Salman Sahab, overall, as far as, you know, saying that the government, whether it was ill-prepared or not, as far as it, like I was talking to Salman Shah Sahab about this, the overall trend of where we are at this time, the increase in prices, the subsidy, like you spoke about, doesn't seem to have been very rationally given, even though, you know, Salman Sahab disagrees with that. But overall, as far as the situation is concerned, regardless of the switch over, which Salman Shah Sahab is talking about, wouldn't you say that this was very much what we would have predicted, considering the past, the recent past, as far as the last government is concerned, where we are today?
Yeah, I would agree with your statement to some extent. I think if you look at the budget, which we are currently implementing, budget 21-22, a lot of problems were already set in that budget. So as compared with the previous two budgets, this particular budget was actually, I think, mostly populist in nature. It was expansionary.
As one would have to say, what was the subsidy? because, you know.
So subsidies and grants were almost tripled in the current budget, and they were, I think, this set the motion for current events. You know, the main essence or the main factor behind the balance of payment crisis is actually the fiscal crisis, right? So yes, I think the decision to freeze the fuel prices was an important one, and but even before that, last year when Shaukat Tareen presented this budget, I think he had his eyes on the growth, which he thought can be fueled through expanding government expenditures. But it doesn't happen, and it did not happen, and ultimately we're going to land in the historically high fiscal deficit of about 8% to GDP, of GDP, and which will be one of the highest in recent history. And I would not blame the current government and the new government for that, because they are just in, and to be fair, I think you know, there is also a degree of you know, lack of clarity within the PMLN regime, which is also reflecting on their statements. But still, I would like to give them some more time.
But as far as lack of clarity is concerned, I mean, I want to go, you know, go into the political realm of things also. As far as politics at this time is concerned, as far as the way it's structured is concerned, we are seeing a lot of hyperbole, not coming from one political party, but coming from all political parties. At this time, of course, you know, we say, you know, Shehbaz Sharif Saab is the Prime Minister, he's very much at the helm of affairs, he's known for being a doer, he's known for, you know, working 22 hours a day. All of those things are a fact at one side. But on the other side, there's also this fact about how, you know, this kind of uncertainty which Salman Shah Saab is also talking about, which is being fueled, not only, I mean, we see what's happening as far as the PTI is concerned. So that also, wouldn't you say is aggravating the economic situation at this time? You know, the kind of political rallies we are seeing, the kind of back and forth exchange we are seeing, which which by the way never stopped even through the PTI government. You know, the way that their ministers were answering back and forth, even though they were very much in the government at that time. So the kind of stability one would have liked to see, which would then have resulted in some sort of, you know, would have manifested in the economic side also, didn't happen.
Yeah. So I think I agree with that statement, but the issue is that you know, when we accept that we are living in a democracy, you know, these kind of political uncertainties do take place. What we need to emphasize is what are the rules of the game. You know, what is the constitution which is in place? Where are the laws which is important? If you take, let's say, economic policy, if you take, let's say, the overall framework, the governance framework, the constitution, that has to be respected. So if, let's say, one party is making agitation, I think that is the democratic right of the parties. But then certainly it should not be at the cost of the laws and the constitution.
When we talk about respecting the constitution, again, let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Dr. Salman Shah. Salman Shah Saab, overall, I hope you've been following the discussion. As far as respecting the constitution is concerned, I think that the way that you know, constitutional provisions have been flouted, have been interpreted, have been, you know, I think engineered, so to speak, to suit political parties, particularly the PTI at this time, is not something that is debatable. And as an economist, don't you think that also has resulted in a lot of uncertainty overall? I mean, you would have expected perhaps a saner or a more smoother takeover once things had happened, once things had aligned, but that has still not, you know, in certain areas happened. The kind of agitation we are seeing, the kind of, again, you know, maneuvering of constitutional provisions that has been seen, has not been seen before in history.
Well, I think that is open to question whether the constitutional arrangements worked or not. Actually, this is a big question mark which the judiciary has to now come forward. We are seeing this in Punjab, and we have seen the Article 63's non-implementation, and these are very important questions which have to be settled. Before I talk about these, I would like to go back to the subsidy for a minute, if you may allow me. I think we are totally over kind of estimating the impact of the subsidy in terms of the fiscal deficit. Don't forget that Shaukat Tareen mentioned that about 400 billion rupees were shifted from the development budget and from other expenditures to provide this subsidy. So overall, the performance conditions of meeting the fiscal deficit were not affected. Now the question is, Shaukat Tareen did not go back to the IMF for the meeting. Mr. Ismail went there. And I don't think Mr. Ismail actually asked Shaukat Tareen how was he going to fund everything and whether it was real or not. So I think this whole notion that we have sudden changes in the government and then there is a total disconnect between the previous government and the new government is a very big issue. Because right now, if you look at the economic situation, there's no action being taken at the macro level, and there's hardly any work being done at the micro level.
A similar situation happened when there was a change of, finance ministers. One went for one meeting, and then another had to follow up. If you remember, within the PTI also, when the PTI was in power. Yeah, so it doesn't. There seems to be
the same government's perspective was being taken. The same government's policies were in place. There was not a change in government. There is a change in some cases, but the policies, amendments, etc., were the decision of the party. So I think the way we changed the government this time was a bit abrupt. It was a bit at a time when it was not necessary.
But do you think the situation would have been different if PTI was in power at this time in terms of what the statistics are today?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the credit debt swaps rates, it started on the day the non-confidence move was made, and there was a big jump in the premiums. The discounts on our bonds started, and they have not recovered. They keep going down.
But we saw the situation get stable, when the new government came in. And let me just come back after a short break. Welcome back. We have with us Kaisar Ahmed Sheikh, who's an M&A with PMLN. And Kaisar Saab, we've been talking about the economic situation with Ali Salman Saab here and Dr. Salman Shah. And overall, as far as, how, according to Salman Saab, he was talking just before we had to take a break. And he mentioned that as far as the situation is concerned, things would have been very different if PTI had been left in power, because there would have been some consistency. How would you dispute that?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You see, I talked in detail 2 days before in National Assembly, about 25 minutes. You see, at present, the economic scenario is very much disturbing.
Okay.
The PTI left whatever are the figures by the end of April, trade gap between import and export figures, official figures, is $39 billion. And current account deficit is $17 billion. They left with this. We have only reserves of $10 billion. In this scenario, in my opinion, we have already defaulted. Okay. That I categorically mentioned in my speech in National Assembly. You see, at present, all of us should get together. This is not, I think the patient is in the ventilator. And we should not talk about the person is at ventilator. We are talking about his marriage dates, that when should he be married. You see, PTI is asking for the election. How can, in this scenario, my opinion is that all of us who are sincere to the Pakistani cause, we should get together, we should find some solution. It is very, very difficult to find out. And you see, how can? The IMF is asking us very difficult conditions, and even our friendly countries, they have almost not
Yes, so at one time there was a lot of there was some tacit agreement. It was going towards that as far as an economic charter is concerned, but it never happened. Do you think there is a possibility it may happen now, considering, of course, the overall political situation and how fiery it is? It does seem unlikely.
You are very right. We, from the very beginning, when PTI government came into power, we knew that they are not very much experienced. So Mia Shahbaz Sharif and Bilal Bhutto Zardari, they asked for the Charter of Economy. I, in various programs, mentioned this is the only alternative. Without Charter of Economy, you see at present, we have, first of all, we have to save our patient. Pakistan, such miserable situation I have never seen. I have come to notice that for 9th month forward, the dollar rate is being quoted at 234.
Okay.
So these are about 23% more. And what we are now, Pakistan government is giving this Roshan digital account in dollars is 7%. So 23% and 7%. At 30%, Pakistan government is purchased. So this is, in my opinion, this is such a miserable situation.
Right.
No other alternative but to get together. Whatever are the conditions, all of us are faithful. They are sincere to Pakistan. So I think this is the only and only demand. It is not the time, okay, election should be held. I don't object on that. But first of all, we should have a Charter of Economy, and along with it, Charter of Democracy also. Because without having some ground that where up to which limits we have to go, we should have between us our like a Charter of Democracy, Pakistan People Party and PMLN had. All the political parties should have Charter of Democracy and should make some
right. Let me go to Salman Shah Sahab. I'll come back to you then, Ali Salman. Shah Sahab, overall, as far as talk of Charter of Democracy is concerned, we've spoken about this before also. Unfortunately, it couldn't happen. But the way situation is, if you've been listening to Kaisar Ahmed Sheikh Sahab, where we are at this time, it seems to be the need of the hour. Do you think that there's a possibility that PTI may agree to that?
I think this is a need of the hour is to get the IMF program going. If we have to make if we have to just remove the subsidies, we remove them. If we have to impose new taxes, we impose the taxes. If we have to increase the prices, we increase the prices and get the program on board. Now, once we have done it, then we can start thinking, well, how did this whole thing happen? And we know that there are very deep-rooted problems in the Pakistan economy. The biggest problem is our energy sector. And the energy sector has been more or less, holding Pakistan hostage because it is based on imports. It's based on very expensive power plants, which are not very cost effective as far as our economy is concerned, and our people cannot afford the power that comes out of the energy sector. So we have to do something about that. And in a longer time frame, our competitiveness and global competitiveness levels are very, very abysmal, and we have to change the way we do business. We have to improve the investment climate. We have to do deregulation of the economy. All those things have to be done. I mean, the crisis is not taking the decision. And I heard Mr. Kaisar talk about it, and he was very critical about the finance minister not being able to do anything so far. He has not made any decisions. We should have done these immediately and revived the program. Rather, now we have to go to Qatar and we sit over there and debate on what has to be done and the budget, how it is going to be. I think if we shouldn't forget.
Overall, as far as delay is concerned, why are we seeing this kind of delay in terms of making decisions? We've seen, of course, the meetings happen in London also with Mia Nawaz Sharif also. Overall, do you expect decisions to be made now very quickly? What do you expect?
You see, these are very difficult decisions. Salman Shah Sahab knows each and everything. You see, he mentioned about some long-term measures. So this is the immediate attention should be how to find a solution of these. You see, IMF has almost, as per my information, they have given very stringent condition, and they may be coming, their delegation may be coming on 18th. But if they feel that our parties are in conflict with each other, I think that even more difficult conditions will be imposed to us. And how can our people, how can the poor people, you see, what happened? Dr. Salman Shah was there in the government. So we left dollar at 117 or 118, and they left the dollar at 189 when they left. So why this poor person, how can they afford?
So why weren't these long-term decisions that Salman Shah Sahab is talking about taken during the last government's tenure? That is also a question, right?
Yes, of course, this is a question. Yes, of course, it's a very valid question.
Ali Salman.
Well,
do you think they could have been taken then? They weren't taken. The uncertainty has persisted, and now we are where we are. Is it that? What is it?
I think by and large, our governments have failed to implement long-term economic policies. So yes, we have maybe idealized some kind of long-term visions, but we have not seen a long-term economic plan or let's say a growth trajectory.
Do you think it's also because our governments have been under consistently, and I mean across the board, I don't mean one government, been under too much pressure in terms of of course the pressure of the people also, and overall from different quarters for them to take the kind of decisions one would perhaps have thought?
When we have a government in place and the government is elected by the people and they have the sovereign authorities, I think the expectation is from the government to deliver in terms of the economic performance. All the government, if you look at the PMLN government, if you look at the PTI governments, they have very sort of elaborate economic targets. But what I don't see is a long-term economic plan. And what we were talking about, this agenda or consensus, I don't see that happening because obviously one is the political temperatures are rising, and sort of unfortunately also there is too much attack on like personalities rather than ideas. So in that scenario, I don't see the consensus on the economy emerging. And an important thing is that we don't seem to have never graduated from the IMF programs in a real sense. We go into IMF program and we stay in IMF program for a couple of years, and then we detrack. And that is why what you were saying is that we don't have a long-term growth perspective is come back to hit us.
Is it also because of course at this time, which is what Khwaja Asif when he spoke also mentioned, the fact that of course you have to take into confidence your allies, you have to take into confidence as far as the PDM is concerned. The pressure point is of course it's important in terms of having the PTI also on the on the go as far as the jalsas are concerned, the rallies are concerned. Do you think it's also about the pressure, the political pressure or the political cost, one may say, which can ensue from whatever decisions that have to be now made as far as economy is concerned?
Of course, at present there is a lot of political pressure, but I have been emphasizing that always our finance minister is not coming from the National Assembly. The National Assembly has the prerogative to make economic policies and to formulate the budget. Then if the finance minister is always, except in last 35 years, except 6 months when Mr. Naveed Qamar was the finance minister, even this is not the first time I am criticizing this. If we are always asking IMF to have our finance minister from there, even Miftah Ismail is from IMF. So even our governor, State Bank from IMF. Where are our own people who come, elected people who are responsible? You see.
So you should have brought somebody who was
my point is Abdul Hafiz Sheikh was the finance minister. Can you find him somewhere now? So these people are not responsible. We are responsible.
You're saying technocrats may not be the right way to go as far as.
And up to now, technocrats did not deliver. All this scenario is why we are at this scenario, because the technocrats have been in position. Can you imagine that India economy in 1990 was 4 times to Pakistan. Now they are 11 times to Pakistan. So where are their they bring their technocrats there? Always their finance minister coming or their ministers coming from the parliament or from the National Assembly. So we have thought that our elected people don't have the vision. Now I know Mifta Ismail very well. He comes from Karachi and I know him very well. Now I know that he has not some such maturity or confidence that he may talk with the IMF. He may have some discussion. Even there he failed. But for the economic matters, anyone who has the confidence of the business community, who has the confidence of multinational companies and people, because we have to attract foreign direct investment.
But
in India, just one more word.
Ji.
In India last year, in spite of more COVID situation, their direct foreign investment was $44 billion.
But is it right to compare our economy with India? Because
it is not. Now they have become much more,
yes.
but they were not such strong. They had made their policies, had made them stronger. We are not giving emphasis. My point is that why don't we attack the foreign investment here? Our foreign investment law, why we are asking for $1 billion to Saudi Arabia, to China, to IMF? Why not the many multinational people?
Ji, Salman Shah Sahab, if you've been following, I'll let you answer that. As far as FDI is concerned, why are we, what Kaisar Ahmed Sheikh Sahab is saying, he's saying, why don't we try and attract foreign direct investment instead of taking from friendly countries? That has, of course, been the policy of the last government also.
Well, I think we'll have to go back to almost 2007 when we had our investment to GDP ratio was almost 24%. And since then, the PPP government which came in after 2008, and Mr. Naveed Qamar and Ishaq Dar were together the finance minister, they really tanked the economy, and the investment dropped to about 12% of GDP, and it has not really recovered since then. Even now it's around 14 to 15% of GDP, and I agree with Professor Sahab at this point that our solution is to make this economy very investment friendly. And we should be attracting investment not only from our domestic investors, but from foreign investors.
Why did the PTI fail to do that, with their own
Because, Mahrukh, you seem to forget that we have gone through a pandemic, which is still, half of China is still closed in that pandemic. And Pakistan is one country which performed exceedingly well during the pandemic, and its performance in terms of getting back to normal. We are in the top 2 or 3 countries in the world, but travel, is still restricted. Investment flows are restricted, but the investment climate is the thing on which we have to work very quickly. China, we had a very good relationship with them as far as infrastructure was concerned, but now we are into business-to-business kind of relationships, and they find it very difficult to be able to invest in Pakistan and do business in Pakistan because of the overwhelming bureaucratic structures we have. Now,
but the overwhelming bureaucratic structures, there was an attempt by the PTI government to, perhaps relax them. But that doesn't seem to have worked. And again, I will come back to you. Let me go to Ali Salman Sahab because, of course, we'll talk about...
During the pandemic, you had to have some very strict rules on travel, and the foreign investors like to visit the place. And before that, we had a big war on terror, which was nobody would come into Pakistan. And one of the reasons why we are left behind is these monumental kind of things which have happened. But now the time is right that we have to work very hard and ensure that
when we talk, of course, COVID is of course, something that's unprecedented, unexpected. It happened. Before that, war on terror is also a reality as far as Pakistan is concerned. But our own demographic, the reasons, there will always be reasons. So why don't, across the board, why don't we have a movement towards an economic charter, which will then lead to long-term economic policies, which will then have fruit probably for Pakistan, no matter which government comes in?
Well, I think we don't need a charter of economy. All we need is consensus that we need a market economy which works. And we have to build the institutions of the market economy. We have to get the government out of business. We have to get the bureaucrat out of the business. And we have to let the private sector work and invest rather than look at the government for handouts. So I think this whole business of charter of economy or charter of democracy, I mean, political parties have their own agendas, but we have to agree that Pakistan has to be a well-functioning market economy, and it has to be a free market economy. And right now, the government footprint is just too big in the economy.
You think the PMLN doesn't agree with that, Ji Ali Salman Sahab? I think overall, it's the same. Whatever Salman Shah Sahab is saying seems to be echoed by what Kaisar Ahmed Sheikh Sahab is saying.
Well, my submission is largely echoing what Salman Shah Sahab was saying, but my submission is that instead of looking at the consensus within the political parties about the economic agenda, we need to look at the institutions of economic governance.
Okay.
If you look at, for instance, the history of Japan, Malaysia and other Asian countries, they had their share of political uncertainties, right? Japan had so many elections and prime minister changed, but then they had agreed on an institution which was called the Ministry of International Trade and Investment. And similarly, you saw in other Asian economies also, and they built the capacity of those institutions to deliver. They built, the trade ministry, they built the industry policy, and that did not change over decades. While the politics around it kept changing, and there were changes in the priorities of different governments, which we should respect. So let's say PTI was more in favor of, let's say, the welfare policies, SAS program, social protection program, all right. But as compared, if we look at PMLN, they were more for favor in the investment. They were investing in the infrastructure development and job creation program. There's a different emphasis. But the underlying thing is that whatever manifesto they bring in, it has to be delivered by a government machinery, which is totally dysfunctional.
Again, a roundabout way of saying that there should be an economic charter, right? Whether you have, if you look at it that way, whether you have institutions which are above any kind of political discord or political, like you said, policies, and they work in tandem with only the economic realities, which is what you are saying essentially, if I'm not wrong.
That's right.
Then that is in a way saying that all government political parties agree to having a sort of an supra economic policy, or institutions who are not related to or irrespective of whatever decisions they make politically.
Yeah, I mean, we have to respect,
we have to respect, separate.
We have to respect the choices of the parliament, and I think I would endorse what Kaisar Sahab was saying earlier on about the importance of increasing the capacity of the National Assembly, of the political parties to understand and analyze economic policies, which is totally absent at this point. And unless that it happens, and political leadership of various parties creates rooms for development of economic profession within the parties, that is not going to happen.
What Kaisar Ahmed Sheikh Sahab, I'm coming to you. What, if I'm not wrong, what you are saying is that there is not that kind of confidence in your political people to expect them to run the economy. So
yes, of course, I am saying like that. Dr. Salman Shah is a very competent person, and Ali Sulman, he will also agree. You see, I have extensive business visits in my experience of 56 years of business. So anywhere I went in Asia, in particular Vietnam, Thailand, China, even India, Bangladesh, anywhere, Korea, all these countries developed with two major conditions. What they did, attracted foreign direct investment, and then they made some export-led growth. These are the things. What happened? Our dollar went from IMF suggested us to devalue the dollar according to the market rates. Our state bank governor said like that. But what happened? Did our export increase? We left, our government left at $118, and we now find 189. With all this, export increased only 25% and import increased 60%. Right. Though the gap between import and export increased. So it is not the only condition. Mr. Asad Umar was with me when I was chairman finance committee. He was emphasizing that dollar devaluation will increase our growth of export. It didn't. We don't have surplus. Our only way is that we should attract direct foreign investment, they will bring technology, they will bring the know-how, and then more and more, we don't have the sufficient capital.
But that didn't happen during the last government.
Didn't happen. Why? Because you are right, our political parties, at least there should be some minimum common agenda, which all of, if we want to develop our country, otherwise we will be giving allegations to one another that you did this and we did this. I invite, being at present, I am a president of Business and Commerce Wing of PMLN. I invite now, even PTI. At that time, in opposition, we were inviting. Even now, we are. This is in the interest of the country. It is in the PTI is also, you see, sincere to the cause of Pakistan. We don't say. But maybe we have difference of opinion in politics.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have.
In economic development of the people,
it's essential to have. Thank you so much for being with us, Ali Salman Saab. Thank you for joining us, Kaisar Ahmed Sheikh. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Salman Shah. Thank you for being with us today. As far as our economic policies are concerned, overall, it seems to be there seems to be agreement on the fact that there have to be rising above any kind of political discourse that's happening in the country for us to have any kind of economic success in the long term. And one hopes that across the board political parties can sit, whether you talk about an economic charter, you talk about institutions that are supra, as far irrespective of whatever the political policies are. The point is there have to be long-term political policies that have to be adhered to regardless of which government comes in, regardless of the political pressures that the governments may have to face for there to be any kind of long-term economic success, and one hopes that we can move towards that. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.